What feels like a million years ago when we began to figure out who the speakers were going to be for this event, it was way before the event even in May, because if those of you that were at the May event recalled that we announced October and May, which means that we must have had a conversation with Mitch, I don't even know. Was it April? Was it March? It was something like that. And for some strange reason, I don't know, Danielle and I, as business owners are, oftentimes like passing ships in the night, but we found ourselves at work and we were riffing off each other, trying to come up with what great speakers we were gonna have for this October event. And for some reason, I just had this like thing that was going off. That was like Mitch. And I'm like, eh? What?
This is what Dina does. Okay, so I've got a thought. So, Alchemy. And like, we were just having a different discussion about something in she goes, get this, Mitch Horowitz. And I go, excuse me? She goes, he's awesome. He's awesome. He's so cool. Like, he doesn't know it yet, but we're gonna be like friends. And I go, okay. And she goes, he needs to speak. He needs to be a presenter. I don't know him. He doesn't know I exist, but this is gonna happen. And I go, all right. And so it is. And there began the journey. And we made it happen. And we reached out and we made contact. And
he wrote back like right away.
Thank you. You were so prompt and professional and lovely. And now you are our dear friends.
Yeah. So that happened. And exactly as Danielle told it. Because sometimes, like as I said, we're passing ships in the night. And a lot of times we do have business meetings in the astral realm. And I have to ask, no, we do, I swear to God. And I have to ask her, did we talk about this in real life or was this a dream?
Except fill me in. Yeah, it sounds about right.
That's what goes on. Okay, so honored to have Mitch Horowitz here. It was so serendipitous, honestly. And thank you for reading emails, because I want you to know that a lot of people do not, including a lot of people in this room, apparently. The amount of people say, I don't read emails. I'm like, well, she doesn't actually. So, Okay, here we go. Mitch Horowitz is one of today's most literate voices of esoterica, mysticism, and the occult. A PEN award-winning historian, Mitch's books include Occult America, The Miracle Club, Modern Occultism, and Practical Magic, which if you haven't already purchased them are available on the back table and can be signed. He has written on occult topics for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and Time, among others, and maintains a Substack newsletter, Mystery Achievement, which you should definitely get because we do, and it's amazing. Mitch appears on many television shows, including as host of Discovery, HBO Max's Alien Encounters. He plays himself in AMC Shudder's VHS Beyond, a 2025 Critics' Choice Award nominee for Best Movie Made for Television. Mitch hosted, wrote, and produced the documentary The Kabbalion, shot on location in Egypt and premiering as the #3 doc on iTunes. Mitch is a former vice president and division editor-in-chief at Penguin Random House, where he published the work of David Lynch, Jacques Vallée, yes, and Manly P. Hall. He wrote the first New Thought book, Awakened Mind, published in Saudi Arabia. His writing, translated into 15 languages, is censored in China, which is definitely means he's writing really good stuff, because I think that's like, of everything I read, of everything that he's published and written and done, that's by far the coolest. Because I'm Gen X, right? That's it. Mitch has 2 sons and lives with his partner, Jacqueline Castell, in Brooklyn. Welcome, Mitch. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm just super glad to be here. The search really lives in this room, and that's thanks to all of you, and thanks to Amityville Apothecary and the wonderful organizers and the other speakers on this program and the staff members and the work that you all are doing. The topic I want to talk about today, I suppose, is practical magic. It's the title of one of my books, but I'm gonna probably speak about topics that fall both in and outside of that book. The main thing that I'm interested in right now at this point in my personal search, and I'm very much a seeker, just as each of you are, and that's the only description I'll ever apply to myself. You know, people will ask, what do you do? What do you like to be called? And so on and so forth, but it's just, I'm a seeker, and we're all in the search together in this room. My wish at this time in my search is to really simplify magic, because we human beings, I think, are just wonderful at rendering things superficially complex, and it's just not always necessary. And one of the things I've been trying to do in terms of my own search and my work recently, as much as we're able, is to turn the pages back and back and back to our primeval ancestry. And it's amazing that fragments from our primeval ancestry have reached us. There's plenty that hasn't reached us, because in addition to creating superficial complexities, we human beings are great at destroying one another and destroying one another's works and hunting witches and throwing manuscripts into fire, and sometimes just through apathy and neglect and through the sands of time layering over things, we lose insights. But we do have certain precious insights into our really, really deep ancestry. And I'm going to say something, and I want to say this with great care, because I really want it to be heard. Not only is the spiritual impulse, the magical impulse, as old as humanity itself, but in the strictest terms, it really goes back to our prehistory, our Neanderthal ancestors, our closest living ancestors, who hadn't quite crossed over into what became known as the Homo sapien era. Our closest living ancestors, the Neanderthals, they had a spirituality, and it's incredible. It's incredible, because their spirituality, going back tens of thousands of years, based on the bare fragments that we have inherited from them, it actually looks a lot like ours. And it would, I contend, be recognizable to almost everybody seated in this room. We are inheritors of ancient statuary that were used and fashioned by Neanderthal men and women that in the mid-19th century were termed Venus figurines. Of course, that's a modern term. Even the identification of Venus as the Hellenic goddess, that wouldn't be heard for millennia and millennia, but archaeologists were operating off of the vocabulary of their generation, and they termed these objects Venus figurines. We possess hundreds of them. What they are bulbous feminine statues. They look somewhat like a pregnant woman, and they're very, very clearly, I was gonna say human, but they're not quite human. They're Neanderthal. They're human-like, but not quite human, figurines of what might be a pregnant woman. And best supposition is that these were fertility statues. But if one wants to talk in terms of a mother goddess, this statuary exists, and it has reached us. And you can, I ask you not to do this now, but you can go on to Google or what have you, and you can put in Venus figurines, and you can look at these objects. And literally or metaphorically, my impulse is just to fall to my knees in front of these objects. This is, in terms of what's reached us as old as it gets. Just think of it. Neanderthal men and women were a lot like us, but they weren't us. They weren't us. Their bodies were different. They had a different gait, they had a different spine, they had a different cranium, very similar to us, but not us. And they did walk this planet, and they did have a spirituality. And these Venus figurines, which were maybe about 4 or 5 inches high, they weren't very big, but that was necessary in a hunter-gatherer society where you move around a lot. And everything had to be useful. There was no such thing as a luxury in life. It was a survival-based existence. And they also had what we would call talismans. Maybe an eagle talon or a bear claw that had a hole bored in it so it could presumably be worn around the neck, just like I'm wearing a talisman right now, just like many of you are wearing talismans right now. And these are presumed to be objects that summoned help for the hunt. They didn't really have agriculture, so everything at that time, survival itself, was based on the hunt, and there was a lot of moving around. And these were venerated objects that were created with permanence, And so I have to laugh when people in academia say like, oh, religion, spirituality, all this magic, it's just confirmation bias, or whatever terms get used to explain away our most deeply meaningful experiences. To me, this tells us that spirituality is not just it's not just some kind of social conditioning. It's not just some kind of brain chemistry, with apologies to the headset-wearing speakers on TED Talks. It's none of that. It's realization. And we know this because it's older than we are as a human species. The Neanderthal people, again, a lot like us, but not us. Possess of a different, somewhat different body, somewhat different brain chemistry, different cranium. So we can't just check a box that says, oh, well, it's just brain chemistry. You see, this part of your brain lights up when you think you're having a religious experience. It's like, well, thank you very much, but, my ancient ancestors say differently. And it's really incredible, the millennia that have passed, the unthinkable sands of time that have passed, all the different wars and events and the spreading out of the human species across the globe. And yet, if we go back to the primeval beginnings, we can find commonalities that we recognize, and that I think confirm the truth and the universality of the religious experience. Now dig this. This conference uses the term alchemy, and many of us understand alchemy, of course, as transformation of materials from coarse to fine, sometimes described as lead to gold, but I think most of us understand that the transformation is a psychical transformation from coarse to fine within ourselves. The very word alchemy itself, which we're using today for the Alchemy Academy, that word stems from what our ancient Egyptian ancestors used to refer to themselves. Our ancient Egyptian ancestors did not use the term Egyptian. That's really more of a Greek Hellenic derivation of how they referred to themselves. They referred to themselves by 3 hieroglyphic characters, K, M, T, phonetically. Kemet. That is at the root of the word Alchemy. Al is an Arabic word meaning to spring from or to come out of. Alchemy means, in the most literal sense, out of Egypt, out of Egypt. Kemet, K-M-T, and the very term alchemy is, of course, at the root of our modern English term chemistry. But when we attend this Alchemy Academy, we are invoking the very term KMT, Kemet, Chemi, that Mother Egypt used to refer to herself. The translation, best as we can understand it, of Kemet, Chemi, is the black land, as Mother Egypt used to refer to itself, because the muddy banks of the Nile River, they give life, they deliver life. That's why I don't really dig when people use terms like black magic. I'm not really into that division, black magic, white magic. I think it's very confusing, and I think it's also a misapplication. Black is not the color of something bad. Black is it's the womb, it's the cave, it's the cosmos, it's the banks of the Nile, the muddy Nile that gave birth to life, the black land out of Egypt, Alchemy. And so here we are at the Alchemy Academy. And it's interesting because when historians speak in terms of prehistory, we hear the term prehistory and we think that means dinosaurs and so forth, and it certainly does. But very frequently, people will use the term prehistory to refer to a period before the advent of writing, or at least writing that has reached us. So if our Neanderthal ancestors had writing, it has not reached us. Their symbols have reached us. The writing that has reached us from earliest humanity seems to be in the form of cuneiform characters from Persia, hieroglyphs, obviously from Mother Egypt, and the binary code of the I Ching, the ancient Chinese ethical work and oracle. And look, if you want to find an antecedent to the binary code that we're using right now, probably to program ourselves out of existence with AI, look at the I Ching. That's what it is. A single or a separated line. How is that? It's the same thing as a 0 and a 1. It's the binary code. It's the human code that underscores everything that we do today in our digital era. So the connections between deepest past and present, they run more fully than we sometimes suspect. And I think they run more fully because they're stripped of some of the complexities, the superficial complexities that we human beings are just great at layering and layering and layering on top of meaning. Now, speech precedes writing. Speech comes before writing. That's true in human history, and we see that that's true in our own lives. That's true in the life of an infant. An infant makes noise, cries, to signal all is not well, and then eventually develops speech, and then eventually after that develops writing. As above, so below, as the Hermetic principle goes. So what goes on in the life of the infant is very much like what goes on in the life of we as a human community. So the power of the word is so significant. We don't have the words that our Neanderthal ancestors used, but we do have words that go with some of our earliest alphabets and languages. We do have some understanding at this point of phonetic correlations to hieroglyphs. Kemet is one of them. We have understanding, to some extent, of earliest pronunciations of Aramaic, of Hebrew, and the pronunciations, they were simpler. The ancient Hebrews, they didn't use vowels. Vowels were only part of modern Hebrew. Ancient Hebrew characters, they're very basic in form, and they don't have vowels, and we're not always 100% sure of the pronunciation that people used. But one can understand how, because sound and because language was so formative to the early human experience, and I would also say to the early Neanderthal experience, its uses were very valuable. I think it's fair to say that nothing was luxuriously wasted. And one of its uses was in the names that people were called by. And the names very frequently had meanings. Nowadays, we're not always so sure of the meanings of our different names. But everything had a meaning. And this is a piece of magic that I want to share with you, one of several that I'm going to suggest over the course of our exchange together. There is a practice that exists in many different traditions. It exists in Kabbalah or mystical Judaism. It exists in esoteric Buddhism. It exists in the Vedic tradition. And that is that if you find yourself needing a kind of a fresh start in life, if you feel you're in trouble and you must turn a corner, or there's something you're unhappy about, within these traditions, you can change your name. You can change your name. And you can do this in secret, and you don't have to tell anyone that you're doing this. This goes on today in the 21st century, within Orthodox Jewish circles, where there is some abiding of esoteric tradition. If a child is sick, there are Orthodox Jewish parents who will change that child's name. And this is taken very, very seriously. In China as well, and in Thailand. And now, the fact is, for some of us today, the changing of a name is very complicated. There's problems with changing your name. Now in Thailand, this practice, which is a practice within esoteric Buddhism, the practice of name change, has become so popular that it's causing social problems. The police are complaining about it because sometimes people commit crimes and then change their name. It's like, well, what are you gonna do? I'm not Mike anymore. And so that's a social problem. But for our purposes, you can change your name in private. And you don't have to tell anyone that you've done it. You can choose a ceremonial name from whatever tradition you like, from whatever deity speaks meaningfully to you, from whatever, you just did ancestor work, from whatever ancestor, perhaps, if you have one, who you wish to be in contact with. You don't need to consult with anyone about this. You don't need to tell your boyfriend. You don't need to tell your shrink. You don't need to tell anybody. You can simply do this ceremonially at a time and a place of your very own choosing. And this name can come from your own background and tradition. It could come from another background and tradition into which you're steeped. It can be ancestral. It can be something that's meaningful strictly and only to you. And this is available to you. If you wish to choose on your own a secret ceremonial name and keep that strictly to yourself and announce that to yourself within as a symbol of identity, it can be a tremendously powerful and private practice for you. The names by which ancient people called things are very interesting because they were almost always connected to their their spiritual outlook, or almost always connected to some sort of a wish to align a child with some kind of principle or blessing or protection. Now, interestingly enough, we in the West, modern West, we tend to think of ourselves, whether or not we're part of the mainstream culture, we tend to think of ourselves as rooted in a place, a geography, a culture that's monotheistic. Like the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are all thought to be monotheistic, and certainly they are in practice. But again, if you turn the pages back, it was not always that way. Now, by the way, speaking of name changes, I just used the term the Abrahamic religions. Well, Abraham and his wife Sarah changed their names at age 90. He was Abram, and it was changed to Abraham. She was Sarai, and it was changed to Sarah. Their names were changed at age 90 to signify a new chapter in their lives. That is to say, they were giving birth to the bloodline of the tribe of Judah that was supposed to be monotheistic, except not everybody was monotheistic. There were a lot of people like you among that early bloodline. The fact is, not all of early Judaism was monotheistic. And we know this because you had people who were kind of living maybe on the outer edges or outer reaches of the tribal homeland, and they were naming their kids with prefixes or suffixes that belonged to different gods, not the God of Abraham. For example, the term El, like you'll find that in any number of names, the term El at the beginning or the middle of a name, that was meant to signify the Canaanite god. That was one of the other tribes in the Mediterranean. And, there were hundreds and hundreds of tribes with their own local gods and their own points of view and their own needs and their own struggles for daily survival. There were many people who either at the beginning or at the end of a name would use El, like Eleanor, for example. And Eleanor was committing that young woman to the protection of El, the god of the Canaanites. Baal was, of course, another god that some guys over the hill were worshiping. And although there was warfare, sometimes people would adopt the gods of their neighbors or the other warring tribe. So there were polytheistic practices that were going on right at the heart of what was supposed to be the monotheism revolution. So I don't see monotheism as being something that is so intrinsically part of Western life that it's just in our groundwater. There's a lot of other things going on in our groundwater. Now, the names and the possession of certain objects were also considered to be of sacred importance. And deities or different spirits, worker bee spirits, daimons or jinn or angels, as we sometimes use the term, would get attached to certain objects. And if people felt that something was amiss, was going wrong in their household, they might get rid of a certain object because they felt that maybe it was attracting the wrong kind of attention. For example, it's not infrequent that ancient people in the Mediterranean, in Persia, in North Africa, really the birthplace of what we call the West, they would not have any kind of blankets or cradle-like objects in the home when they were expecting a baby, because they didn't want, possibly, the angel of death, Samael, or sometimes Azrael, See, there's the term El again. We're Western, we're monotheists. Well, there's the term from the god of the Canaanites, so we're not so monotheistic as we think. They didn't want to attract the negative attention of the angel of death to a cradle or bedclothes or something that might be prepared for the child. So I would say that you can extrapolate from that. And again, if there's a dramatic change that you want to make in life, and of course, our friends who practice feng shui could do a whole day on this, you can remove objects from your house that you feel are perhaps attracting negative attention. You could determine that you don't want to have any objects in your house that you feel have lingering attention or maybe have served as a kind of magnet for the wrong kind of attention. As my partner Jacqueline can tell you, I've taken this to a rather obsessive degree. I tend to get rid of a lot of things. And, you don't want to catch me like moving apartments, because I move by like stuffing garbage bags full of things and then putting them out at the curb. And the other night Dina was taking us to the famous Amityville house, and the owner of the house was putting garbage bags of free toys out at the curb to give them away. Do not take those toys. If you've done so, put them back. You're just waiting for Spielberg to come along and be like, that doll's head is going to turn around tonight, so don't do that. But I do think that the objects you have in your house, if one follows the line of reasoning that I'm trying to get across, to our ancient ancestors, every one of those objects had some potential to attract the attention of what we might call non-human intelligences. And I would say it's a worthy experiment to go home and say to yourself, do I really want this here? You may want grandma's vase, and if you do, great, that's terrific. But don't let sentimentality rule your life. I'm not saying that you have to become completely ascetic. Sometimes I look around and I realize nothing I own is older than like 15 years old, if that. I've gotten a little zealous with this kind of thing. I'm not sentimental in that way. I'm not saying you have to sweep through your house and determine like, no more silverware, because I got divorced. Hell with, But it's a thought. It's a thought. And you could try on a small scale, see if you like it. Does it work for you? I've let go of all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've passed through different phases in my life, and I'm like, the china, the soap, put it on the curb. Put it right on the curb, And I just suggest it. We're raised in this very conventional mindset to think like stuff is good. And some stuff is good. But stuff also can get a lot of residue attached to it, emotionally or spiritually, and you might feel a lot happier if you sweep through and you get rid of it. Certainly, our ancient ancestors would understand what you were about, what you were doing. I speak of time and the passage of time. And time, linear time to us, feels so overwhelmingly real. And it is real. It is real in certain respects, of course. If I don't show up to do my talk at 4:30, there's a lot of trouble. And time is a marker. It's funny, I guess this could be said. What we call time is not really time, it's a means of measuring time. 4:30 is a means of measuring time. What is time? What is time exactly? And in that vein, I want to speak to you about a practice that I offer to you as an experiment. I'm talking about wide swaths of time, and it can feel almost impossible to imagine the passage of these tens of thousands of years, of millennia and so forth. But we confuse time with measurement of linearity, and they're different things. I would say up until maybe about 75 years ago, again, I can't help but speak in measurement of time, but about 75 years ago, almost everyone from a Western mindset would have said that time moves like an arrow. It's a straight arrow. And sure, we understand that there's indigenous wisdom that parts ways from that, and sure, we understand that we can talk of vision quests and we can talk of ancient traditions that question that, but people would think of it as mythopoetic, not real. You know, time is a straight arrow. Well, time is not a straight arrow. Time is not a straight arrow. We know from quantum mechanics that something called retrocausality exists, where on the particle level, there are objects, one of them is called a positron. There are objects that literally move backwards in time. They might collide with another particle, reverse charges, and literally move backwards in time. The physicist Richard Feynman won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965, the year I was born, for writing about his discovery of the positron, a particle that actually moves backwards in time. And there are retrocausal effects that have been witnessed in quantum physics, and it is a very active discussion, and it's a very exciting area of inquiry. Well, again, as the Hermetic Egyptian principle has it, as above, so below. A natural law, in order to be a law, must be ever present. It must be going on always, all at once. Doesn't necessarily mean its effects are felt in the same way. We would agree that something called gravity is going on all at once, but you'll experience gravity differently on the moon than you will on Earth. Likewise with retrocausality, likewise with objects moving backwards in time. If it's a natural law that's observable under certain circumstances, it has to be consistent, even if we don't experience it all the time. Now, a very brilliant research psychologist at Cornell, who some of you may have heard of, named Darrell J. Bem, released a paper in 2011 in which Darrell tested for the existence of a cognitive retrocausality. A cognitive retrocausality. And what he found, and this always blows people's minds, but it's the absolute truth, and I'm going to warrant it to you as truth. What he found, in short, I'm going to keep this very brief, is that subjects who took a very, very simple test, like a test where you might be asked to memorize a list of words and then recite back a list of words. When test subjects in double-blind and very deeply well-structured studies were asked to keep studying in the future after they had taken the exam, their scores spiked by maybe about 2 percentage points. Significant in statistical studies. In fact, that's considered highly significant in social science studies. And the principle at work seemed to be that if the students, let's say they take their test and get whatever score, they happen to get, maybe nothing surprising, kind of an average run of scores. If you were to take that group and then have them continue to study for the test afterwards, their scores in the present would rise. Their scores in the present would rise. There was a reaching backwards in time, so to speak, to improve their cognitive performance in the present. Now, when Daryl released this paper in 2011, there was outrage within the academic world. It was released in a very highly regarded, peer-reviewed, juried journal, and academicians, academic psychologists, for the most part, went ballistic and said, this is an embarrassment to the whole field, this is crazy, how could a respectable journal possibly publish something like this? I'm just a bystander, I'm just describing all this. The Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker kindly denounced me and said, as I was defending Daryl's work, said, is Horowitz actually saying that if you take a test and you get a B and you keep studying in the future, you can increase your grade? And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, because that's what the data shows. Because I don't make the rules, and the rules are a lot stranger and a lot more surreal than we have been raised to understand. A fact that has driven us forward as a human species again and again and again, every time there's been some mark of fitful progress on our journey to wherever it is we may happen to be going. And where we may happen to be going may in fact be backwards. The great spiritual philosopher G.I. Gurdjieff said, the past controls the future, but the present controls the past. More than 100 years earlier, the philosopher Hegel said something very similar, and we've lost sight of Hegel because Hegel, who was a metaphysical philosopher, got remade into a materialist philosopher by a kind of willful misunderstanding. And Hegel said that in matters of time, the goal that we're actually reaching toward is not the future. The goal is the past. There is a circuitous, circular quality of time, like the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros swallowing its tail. And what we are learning in the 21st century is probably something that we're relearning, that our most ancient ancestors understood, which is that time is not a straight arrow. Time is a spherical spiral. And I ask you to really hear this, because we walk around, every one of us, myself included, with all kinds of regrets in life. We think, I could have done this differently. I could have protected myself in this situation. I could have not stumbled into this trap. And we walk around with these regrets, and we feel this deep sense of melancholy. Oh well, hindsight is 20/20. Hindsight is a lot more than 20/20. Hindsight may actually and truly, if abided and lived with some degree of awareness, be able to change and rearrange a person's existence in ways that are both subtle and literal. What Daryl Bem attempted to do is show a subtle change in the most cognitively strict of ways. But in fact, there may be changes that are taking place in this incredible mosaic of ways that we are unaware of. In fact, it's possible that our perceptions of past, present, and future are remade at every instant of time. If I were to ask anybody in this room, where are you from? What did your mom and dad do for work? Where did you grow up? They would have answers to those questions, and those answers might be very literal and very plain and very self-evident, and we could go through the scroll on our phone and say, well, this is me when I was on this carousel as a kid, or whatever, and it would all be literally true. That doesn't mean it's the only reality that's going on. There could be infinite strands of reality that we perceive as authentic as the words I am now speaking, as persuasive as the floorboards beneath our very feet, but that are changing with every instant of perception. I want to say something to you about Daryl Bem's work. Okay, the paper that I mentioned to you, he published it in 2011. Within about 10 years of of that paper being published, and after all the criticism and all the cavilling and all the cries of crazy and nonsense and ridiculous, something very quiet happened. And the quiet thing that happened is this. Daryl's results were deemed confirmative in what is called a meta-analysis that encompassed 90 experiments at 90 experiments in 30 different labs in 14 different nations. 90 experiments at 30 labs in 14 different nations. It's not that every experiment worked. It did not. But enough experiments worked so that according to meta-analytic methods, the possibility of chance occurrence is on a scale of near non-existence. In other words, the results were proven confirmatory. That didn't make headlines. The critics crying crazy, that made headlines. A decade later, a mass-scale meta-analysis with more experiments and a greater number of raw data than we have probably used to prove the efficacy of aspirin, that confirmatory study, that didn't make headlines. So I guess what I'm trying to get across to you is that, and I say this very plainly, and I'm going to use just very direct language, you, the individual, are more powerful than you know, and we have greater tools for approaching life than we know. And regrets and sorrow about the past are not things that we necessarily have to carry with us like some sort of an unwanted limb or burden on our shoulders. There are different possibilities. Is this magic? Well, my definition of magic is causative ritual. That's it. Causative ritual. And in fact, I have made the case, I've spoken at a tech conference not long ago on the theme of magic for non-believers. I want to speak to people about this material who don't identify themselves as spiritual or believing. You can be agnostic, you can be a physicalist, you can be materialist. What does it matter? What do all these vocabulary words even matter? As Neville Goddard, one of my heroes, said, if the thing works, who cares what the world thinks? That could go on my gravestone, as far as I'm concerned, or urn, or whatever it is. If a thing works, who cares what the world thinks? And use it. That brings me to another point. If I'm right that magic is causative ritual, that these rituals can be effective, changing your name, continuing to work on things after the fact that you want to be better, finding a relationship through object and word with non-human intelligences, honoring deity in the same way that our Neanderthal ancestors honored deity. Okay, what do we do with this? We're all possessed of needs, in our lives. I mean, if I asked everybody to write down 10 things that you need, nobody would have any problem finding his or her way to 10. And I want to offer you something that I think could be revolutionary in the life of an individual. And that is I suppose I could call it the magical right of self-disclosure, And this is very private. And I ask you to, if you want to do this, do it in private. I believe that a lot of us are unaware of what we really want in life. We are so accustomed to recitation within our heads. And that recitation very frequently reflects internalized peer pressure. And I think that the greatest barrier to happiness is internalized peer pressure. And it goes on all the time and everywhere. I mean, we within the alternative spiritual culture engage in this. We flee orthodoxy, sometimes fleeing the orthodoxy of our childhood to come into an alternative set of practices, and then no sooner do we start creating walls and orthodoxies. And it's very, very limiting to the search. I mean, what could be more limiting than this kind of analytic certainty that you have to check this box, or you have to say that you didn't use the word service, go back to square one. You don't have to do any of that, you know. A lot of, the term reciprocity has been used today, and I really honor and venerate that term. And I'm very glad that term has been used, because I think if I have one principle on the path, it's that, reciprocity. If one believes in the connectedness of humanity, both in physical form and in extra-physical form, then it stands to reason that reciprocity is only perfectly sensible. So I'm not saying, do whatever you want. At the same time, you must know what you want. You must know what you want. And I believe that due to internalized peer pressure and due to conditioning, tradition, custom, habit, we are locked into a very small cycle of telling ourselves, this is what I want, this is what I want to accomplish, experience in life, this is what makes me happy. Are you sure? Are you sure? Because I think a lot of times we condition ideas of self based upon custom, internalized peer pressure, and what we think makes us look good in the eyes of other people. Now, knowing what you want and acting on it are two different things, okay? They're two different things. Let's set aside, and you're really entitled to this, let's set aside, for the time being, the question of practicality, the question of, oh, but if I do this, then I'm going to experience this consequence or what have you. There may be things that you want that are very problematic in terms of, well, how do I act on that? But the terrible barrier that we erect is that we don't even know. We don't even know. And all of the energies and the possibilities that are available to us go to waste because we really don't know. Life is so strange. And when you know what you want, and when you get really clear about it, all the energies that I'm talking about, these psychical energies, these relationships to deity or to the unseen or to the extra-physical, these time reversal qualities of life, those things may come into play. I'm sure many of you know of the spiritual philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti. And in the mid-60s, Krishnamurti was speaking to a group of Indian students, adolescent kids, teenagers, at a boys' school in India. And the dialogues, the record of these dialogues is very interesting, because these kids, they really questioned him. I mean, they were pretty tough with him. And well, I remember one kid, I really like this kid. He said to him, you're telling us, just be, we don't have to do anything in life. Well, why are you speaking here? Is this your hobby? Why are you doing any of this? And I thought the way the kids challenged him were great. And one kid said to Krishnamurti that he wanted to become an engineer, and that his father was unhappy about that. His father wanted him to go into the family business, and if he pursued his dream of becoming an engineer, his father would kick him out of the house. And he said, what am I supposed to do? And Krishnamurti said to him, "Sir, listen to me." And he addressed this teenager as "Sir," which I liked. "Sir, listen to me. Life is very, very strange. The moment that you determine that you want to do something, you'll see life will come to your assistance. There'll be an auntie, or there'll be a grandmother, or there'll be somebody who can help you, but you will never know. You will never know if you cower behind that insistence that it's not practical. And another kid said to him, oh, well, look, you're telling us to live as individuals, you're telling us to live out our own lives. There's a lot of complexity in life. How are we supposed to do this? How? And he said to him, listen to me. If you were walking down the road and you saw a cobra on the road in your path, you wouldn't say, oh, what am I supposed to do? You'd know exactly what to do, and you'd run away and you'd get away from that cobra. Life is like that. When we ask how, we really don't want to do it. We really don't want to do it. Now that's for everybody in this room to determine for themselves. But know the thing that you want. Be aware of the thing that you want so that you don't go to your grave asking how, or asking, oh, well, it's not practical. Know it. Then we can cross the rapids of how do we get through this? Then we can deal with the fact of, is there an alligator in that river? We don't know that. We don't know that. And there's time enough for those considerations. And those considerations are necessary. But do you want to cross the river? Is that something that you want? Or maybe a person doesn't want that. But I think knowing how is profoundly important. And when you discover the thing you want, I want to give you a exercise that might help you act on the thing that you discovered. And this exercise is, I suppose you could call it an esoteric or occult method called sex transmutation. A lot of people have heard of sex magic. The words sound so delicious. We like repeating it, sex magic. But the fact is, what I'm going to give you is a very simple exercise, again, completely private, that you can try and that you can use. I think if I had, I've searched high and low for the origin of this exercise. And the best I can personally come to in terms of the Western world is in the work of Plato. This exercise I'm going to give you is not exclusive to Hellenic spirituality. You find it in Taoism, you find it in Tantra, you find it in Kabbalah, but the earliest that I've personally been able to find it within our Western context is Plato. There's a Platonic dialogue called Symposium, and in this dialogue, Socrates is talking about an Egyptian priestess named Dioshima. And Socrates reports this Egyptian priestess in Symposium. Why kids don't learn this in school, I have no idea. Kids are taught to believe Plato is boring. It's like, Plato is not boring. And Socrates is talking about this Egyptian priestess, Dioshima, who explains to him that the prayers of the individual, according to Dioshima, cannot reach the gods. So we have a problem. But through the medium of Eros, the Hellenic god of sexuality, through the medium of Eros, those prayers can find a bridge and reach the gods, and the individual can receive help from the gods. Now, our Hellenic ancestors understood genius itself as being a gift that was bestowed by deity. The term genius, or plural genii, is like a spirit, like a helpful worker bee spirit. You know the term genie or jinn in Arabic. It's the same thing. It's derived from that term. And I want to offer you a super simple exercise that employs the method that is hinted at in this Platonic dialogue attributed to an Egyptian priestess in Symposium. Dig this, super simple. Doesn't require sexual abstinence or anything of that type. I was talking about this once to a popular and wonderful podcaster and comedian named Duncan Trussell, and before I could continue, Duncan said, "Don't tell me I can't jerk off." And I said, "No, I'm not telling you that. It's not the case. Relax." But it goes like this. And hear this, you don't hear it. When you feel the sexual impulse, sexual desire rising up within you, you can, at times and places of your own choosing, at times and places of your own choosing, by a mental shift in attention or focus towards a cherished task, whatever it may be, you can elect as a psychical, intellectual fact to redirect that sexual attention towards the task that you have in front of you, whatever it may be. It may be completing a book proposal. It may be a job interview. It may be stating your preference for something. It may be doing your taxes. It could be anything. But privately and within your own person, again, you're not telling this to anybody, because as soon as you start telling things to people, you know what happens. That's ridiculous. But what about, no, we're not diluting our power. We're not diluting our power by just sharing it with whomever happens to be in the room with us, or by sharing it because we think we should according to some social custom. It's private, it's yours. You feel the sexual urge within you. You make the decision at a time and a place entirely of your own choosing to, through a shift in mental focus, the mind can't do everything, but it can do this. Redirect your attention to the cherished task. And by placing the sexual impulse at the back of the cherished task, whatever it is, you will add intelligence, enthusiasm, creativity, acumen, energy to that task, and you will do better at it. You will excel. Now, some other time, you can release sexual tension in some other way. You can have sex with another person, you can self-pleasure, you can procreate. I think the principle at work here is that the sexual impulse is the urge of life itself for recreation, for replication. Now, we think of sexuality as something that obviously brings physical pleasure and obviously results in some cases, replication. What we don't suspect, and what I think the ancients understood, is that this act of replication, while it's certainly true on a physical scale, it's not just that. Remember what we were saying about a natural law. A law, in order to be a law, must be true consistently. It doesn't mean that it's going to be experienced in the same way consistently. Water is always H2O, but water can be a liquid or a vapor or a solid, depending upon the speed of its molecules, or depending upon what we would call temperature. It's really just vibration. It's what Pythagoras talked about. All of reality, everything that is a thing, is vibration. So again, it's universal. So the expectation that sexuality has its only replicable function in procreation, it's a mistake. It's short-sighted. It can be used in these other ways. It can be used, obviously, in the conventional physical ways. It can be used in the reproductive ways. You can satisfy the sexual wish in whatever way you want. But you can also apply the sexual urge in the direction of a greater selfhood and a greater efficacy. Now, I say this because I really want to make it clear that we are not without an expanded tool belt of possibilities. And sometimes finding this tool belt and the objects within it, again, can mean turning the pages back and back and back and asking, what were our primeval ancestors interested in? Why? Why were they wearing an eagle claw or a bear claw or worshiping a so-called Venus figurine? Why were they doing that? Their lives were precarious lives. They were hunter-gatherers. They had to move around a lot. They were worried about getting attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or getting in trouble with the guys living over in the next cave and making sure there's enough food. They didn't have time for trifles, but they did these things. They did these things. I want to offer one more idea to you all, and then I'm going to open things up for questions and exchange. I think that in seeking relationships with deity and seeking relationships with spirit, in doing any of the things that I've been talking about, we can all permit ourselves to be a lot freer and to be a lot more spontaneous. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to sell all your belongings and join some sort of like a caravan and move to the desert, although you might want to do that. I really don't know. But you don't have to not go to work on Monday. Maybe Monday's a holiday, on Tuesday. You don't have to depart from your life, but you can be a lot more radical in your search and in what you allow yourself to experience. And so there's a practice, one further practice I want to offer to you called spontaneous deity petition, or you can call it whatever you want. It seems to me that in the same way that Eros was identified as the bridge between the individual and the gods, a kind of divine messenger. Imagine it. Eroticism or sexuality as a divine messenger. And by the way, we see the same practices, of course, today within the Catholic Church. And what are saints but intercessors, deliverers of prayer, deliverers of petition? Diotima was really saying that same thing. You can identify a force, in this case Eros, who serves as a bridge, as a petitioner. I think that the key ingredient in terms of reaching the extra-physical, whether it's contact with deity, ancestor, or some sort of non-human intelligence, or some kind of common mind, nous, the Hermeticists called it, the idea of non-local intelligence. I think it requires us to have some skin in the game. There has to be passion there. It can't just be a mental act. It can't just be a call and response act. And things can get old, and they can get old in a hurry. You may do Hatha yoga, and for a while Hatha yoga is like, this is fantastic. And then after a while, perhaps it starts to feel like a routine. I'm just pulling that as a random example. Routine can be very blocking of truth and of accessing greater parts of ourselves, including extra-physical parts of ourselves. My feeling is that when you feel a wish within yourself, whatever it is, act on that wish. Go into prayer, go into meditation, go into visualization, go into affirmation. I want to tell you a story that will illustrate this. Many years ago, I was taking a walk on the banks of the Charles River in Weston, Massachusetts. And those of you, if any of you are from that area, you may be aware that on the banks of the Charles River in Weston, Massachusetts, is a stone tower that extends it actually extends exactly 38 feet in the air. And it's called Norumbega Tower. And it was built in 1889 by people who sought to commemorate what they believe was a Viking settlement on the banks of the Charles. And historically and geographically, the existence of a Viking settlement on the banks of the Charles is possible because the Charles River connects to the St. Lawrence River, and the St. Lawrence River goes up to Newfoundland in Canada, where there was in fact a Viking settlement. Leif Erikson and ships of his touched ground there and established a settlement. We know this from objects and structures that they left behind. So there is a waterway connection from the St. Lawrence to the Charles to the banks of Weston. It's possible that a settlement did exist there. But in any case, in 1889, people who were positive towards this idea constructed this tower to commemorate the settlement. And I said to myself, I want to go inside this tower. And it was covered with bars on the windows, because, you know, we got to keep the Satan worshiping heavy metal kids out. And so I go inside, and there's like the upside down pentagram, and I'm right at home, and I'm like, this is great. And so I slithered my frame actually into, through one of the grates, you know, that were covered it. And there's this dank stairway up top, and I climbed the dank stairway, and I went right to the top of the tower. And I had one wish burning in my heart at that time, which was to become a published author. It must have been just before my first book, Occult America, came out in 2009. So it was just before that. And I went to the top of this tower. It was a still winter day, dead of winter. You know, I don't know, maybe it was around New Year's. Dead of winter, clear day, totally still. No sound of birds, nothing, snow on the ground, cold day. And from within me, as a total experience, physical, mental, emotional, psychical, as a total experience, I prayed at that time to whatever helpers, gods, deities would hear me. I didn't name anyone. I issued my prayer that I would become a published writer. It was the most important thing to the world in me at that moment. And I felt something, a totalizing experience, well up within me, encompassing mind, body, emotion. It was a total unifying experience, inspired by that tower, but born from a passion and a deep, deep want within. And all I can tell you is, within the next 2 years, I did have my first book came out. I became a widely published writer on occult topics for places that usually do not groove to occult topics, including New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. It was not always the happiest experience, because it is not a happy experience offering up cherished material to people who think, you know, you're nuts. But, you know, as Steve Martin said, be so damn good that they just can't ignore you. You know, and it was hard, but it did occur. And that moment was a pivotal moment in my life. And I've done things like that since then. There was a bas relief of the god Mercury down in the financial district on my way to work in my publishing job. I wasn't so happy. I wanted to exit my publishing job. I would pray to this bas relief of Mercury every morning. There was this wonderful woman from Latin America who was selling copies of the New York Post on an orange crate in front of Mercury, and she probably thought, here comes the lunatic again. Hi, yeah. And you know, I would do my prayers. I've prayed. There's a mural to Prometheus, a venerated figure to me, in the New York Public Library at Fifth Avenue and 42nd. I have stood right in the middle of that floor and prayed to that figure of Prometheus. There was an old friend from college who ran into me there and said, I wanted to say hi to you, but it looked like you were praying. I said, I was. You know, let him call you a lunatic. Let him. When you feel that furnace within you stoked of desire, don't wait. Don't wait for the right time. Don't wait for the right time. I venerate and love the spiritual philosopher G.I. Gurdjieff. He said one thing I've never fully understood, which is don't pray in the washroom. I pray in the washroom. And I invite you to pray in the washroom or wherever you feel like praying. Because I feel that when that furnace burns within you of something that you want, there's no later. There's no later. Act on that, because that bridge, that passion, that too is your eros. That too is your eros that will help foster a bridge to some invisible principle of life. I grew up in a traditional religious background, and by my early 30s, I kind of soured on congregational spirituality, call and response spirituality, hymnal spirituality. It's very good for some people, and I'm first in line to shake their hand, but it was not for me. And I needed something more raw, more primal, even though the spiritual appeal is something that I believe in every bit as much as my congregational brothers and sisters believe in it. But that bridge, that eros, that needs to be honored when you feel it. And if you wait until next Tuesday, or if you wait until Sunday, or if you wait until 45 minutes, or if you don't want to be embarrassed looking like a lunatic praying in the New York Public Library, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it. So allow yourself to feel that spontaneity. And I truly believe that the legacy that has reached us in fragments across these vast stretches of how we measure time, not necessarily time, but how we measure time, is one that gives us an extraordinarily expanded sense of selfhood and possibility. And my deepest wish for every one of you in this room is to discover that thing, convention be damned, conformity be damned, pure opinion be damned, that you are interested in. Hold it within, furnace-like. And when that furnace fires up, act on it through these esoteric inner methods that are yours, that are yours in private, and that are your birthright. And I thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy we have some time for questions, exchange, anything that's on anybody's mind. Use a mic so that everybody can hear you, please.
Sasha and Antonio are literally fighting for the microphone. But I'm giving it to Sasha first, ladies first, but Antonio's not gonna like it.
He's gonna let, what if we have the same question? Like we have the same, yeah, card. I was curious if you have a practical magical application for what Daryl Ben put in his paper?
Yes. I'll give you two examples and they'll speak immediately to what you're saying. A friend of mine in New York City was looking for work, and there was a job at a religious organization, church, big church, that she really wanted. And she said, you know, I knew this was mine. I knew it was mine. And it didn't work out. And she was very disappointed. And she came to me and she said, you know, what do you think? And having this very conversation with her, I said, what I think is, you keep prepping for this interview as if it's tomorrow. Yeah. And you keep doing that. Now, you may need to do other things too. Don't stop your job search. I mean, you're not going to stop rowing in the middle of a river. You know, keep doing that too. But there's not a no, you know, in the picture for you. Keep doing your job search, send out your applications as you need to be doing, but you keep prepping, keep prepping, keep prepping. All I can tell you is what happened. I can only tell you what happened. A week later, she emails me, just apoplectic with joy, saying, you'll never believe this, but the boss man called and said that I still want the job because the second opening for the same position had appeared, and this one had even more hours than the first position I was looking for. She was thrilled. There was another guy, a Thai kickboxer named Spencer Hanley, and you can look him up. You know, don't do it right now, but you can look up Spencer Hanley, Thai kickboxing online. He's a champ. And he said to me, I have a fight in 9 days, and I feel good about my training, but I need help with my mental games, so what do you recommend? And I gave him an exercise, very simple, that I call the 30-day mental challenge, which is just a contract that you make with yourself to think along constructive lines for 30 days. And he said to me, well, look, I'm going to do that, but I need something in the short term. And I said to him, this is short term, because I can guarantee nobody in your opponent's corner is coaching him on retrocausality. I think we can agree on that. And so you determine that after the bout, after the match, you keep training, 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 as if it's tomorrow. And he said he would do it. Again, I'm just going to tell you what happened as it happened. And I can prove it. Not only did he win the fight, he came out, he looked relaxed, he was having a good time, he was very respectful toward his opponent, he was in charge from the beginning of the bout, and he won. And he comes out, and you know, most fighters, for their entry music, they'll choose some drill rap or some death metal or something like that. He comes out to the song, Heaven is a Place on Earth. Yeah. And one of the ring announcers says, the fact that he's coming out to Belinda Carlisle makes me so happy. About, I don't know what it was just several days later, without my having written about it, talked about it, anything, I hadn't written about it, I get 2 voicemails from Belinda Carlisle saying, I'm a real fan of your books and I just want you to know. And I'm like, oh my God, I fell in love with her at age 17, you know, when she was in the Go-Go's. And I'm just like, I can't even figure out how to function. And I was so thrilled. And these events, they all just happen. So I think that, yeah, you have to honor life. You have to keep doing whatever life requires of you, but you keep preparing for whatever the thing it is that you wished for, or if there's something that didn't go as you like, prepare for it to have gone as you like and keep working on it. And the prep that you do after the fact it has a reaching backwards in time effect. And there's going to be an effect that is unpredictable, but real. Yeah?
You might not have an answer because it might be, do you have a favorite Goddard quote?
Oh wow, there's so many of them. The one I have tattooed here somewhere is live from the end. But I would say, you know, Neville said in a series of lectures that he delivered in Los Angeles in 1948, we will eventually discover the existence, scientists will eventually discover the existence of a serial universe. But how we actually use that serial universe is more important in fact. And that was about 10 years before, the physicist, his name is escaping me at this instant, Hugh Everett III, came up with the so-called many worlds theory, or the multiverse, suggesting that because different outcomes simultaneously exist, it means reality must split off into this infinitude of realities, of events. And so now we sit down and we watch a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it's based upon the many worlds theory, or the multiverse theory, that Hugh Everett III articulated in the late 1950s. But 10 years earlier, there was Neville saying it to an audience in Los Angeles. And, you know, if that doesn't give a person goosebumps, nothing will, you know.
And just one more question, what are you working on next?
Well, I have a book I'm supposed to be working on. I haven't told my publisher yet that I'm not so sure about it, so Gilles, I'm thinking about it. But no, I'm working potentially on a book about the multiverse, but there's other things that I'm thinking about right now too, and passion and spontaneity mean a lot to me, so do fulfilling contracts, so I'll have to figure that out, but that's the needle I'm trying to thread, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. So my question is also on retrocausality, and sticking on the criticisms that you were getting about it, and about the fact they said, well, you got a B-,
Right.
and you're saying that, you know, if I keep studying, I'm going to get an A, but do you think that is essentially a failure on the part of the critics to understand, you know, non-linearity in temporal, you know,
Yeah.
right? Essentially, it's the idea that no, you got a B minus because you were going to continue to do it, and in reality, you would have gotten a C or a D.
Right, that's the contention. And you're absolutely right. I think it's a debater's trick to state the contention in a way that seems purposefully absurd. But I sort of like break the debater's trick by agreeing to the purposeful absurdity and being like, yes, that is what I'm saying. Because it is that radical. Now, if you got back your paper and it's a B minus and you're like, gee, that's not so great. No, I don't think that paper, you're going to wake up the next day Harry Potter style and the B minus will be a B plus. I don't think that's going to happen. But one does need to see the yin and yang, the absolute yin and yang of time. I think yin and yang versus an arrow of time is a much more accurate depiction of what really goes down. And I think it was, it's very interesting, like what Hegel was trying to get across about time, that the goal of time is not the so-called future, but it's the past. I think he was suggesting that the future already exists, and the past or the present is sort of drawing us towards it. And there's this marriage that we don't really see, this kind of alchemical marriage, and nor do we know what the results will ultimately be. There could be a different branching off of a multiverse because you kept studying. There could be something else altogether, but the marriage is there.
It reminds me actually of a quote from a video game, so I'm a big nerd, and they were talking about essentially the character has precognitive ability, and they're like, well, why do you know this? It's the idea that this character is fated to transcend, and the idea is that once you have transcended, you are always transcended because you're no longer temporal, so everything is simultaneous.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's beautiful.
This one over here.
Awesome. So I have two things. One of them was while you were talking about retrocausality, I have to say I had like a moment of shock, only because probably many people have recently been experiencing weird dreams or what have you, especially around all the full moon stuff. But last night in particular, and I remember waking up very shocked by my dream. And I say this because, and it's not gonna fully make sense, but it was a moment of there being in this room where there was a lot of water kind of flooding the area and going in a counterclockwise motion. And the whole thing was people would be holding up these cards and being like, okay, if you go into this water, as it's swirling backwards, you'll come out new. Like, and it was interesting, and I only say this because it blew my mind of the term retrocausality, because the whole thing was any person who came back out was slightly different in their form, their appearance, and I thought it was kind of amazing being like, whoa, you are essentially in this counterclockwise motion of this water, you are going back in time and having this slight change, this slight adjustment, and what have you, and coming out. And like some people, I know there was a moment where I did that, and then when I started seeing other people and getting kind of caught up in it, I was like, whoa, what is going on? Everyone's having this empowerment to change themselves. And so, I don't know. The only reason why I brought that up is because the moment I was hearing you describe that, I was like, oh my goodness, crazy to have that dream last night. And I felt like a huge part of me all morning was like, why was I feeling that? Why was I picturing that? And so I feel like there was a huge connection point, especially listening to you describe retrocausality, because it was just such a bizarre concept.
You know, the symbolism of your dream is just incredible, because what it reminds me of is the Temple of Bethesda in Scripture. And the Temple of Bethesda was a spring, a pool, by which sick people would lay and wait. And when the waters stirred, when you saw movement in these still waters, the temple was thought to be blessed, and it was a portal to healing. And so the lame, the sick, the blind would then go into the temple to seek healing. And I think the dream you had, symbolically, it's exactly the temple of Bethesda. Yeah.
Wow. Well, never heard of that, so definitely noted that to look more into later. And the other part that I had, or kind of questioned a statement, because would you also say with retrocausality, another form of practical magic, would you say, I don't know if it would be practical magic per se, but I've heard of people describing like inner child work, inner child healing, that a lot of people are like, because time's not linear, and like right now, I might be a 27-year-old version myself, but so is here my 5-year-old version, my 80-year-old version, all of us at once. Would you say that going through inner child healing -- even maybe shadow work feeds into retrocausality of going back for like reparenting the self to both help the child you were then, even if it doesn't necessarily change per se, like the trauma or events people have gone through, for it to empower the self now as well?
I always say it has to, it really has to. I've never personally done like a rebirthing experience, for example. I'm very open to it. It's just not something that's been part of my experience up to now. And I think that there's so many different dimensions to it, so many different possibilities. It could branch off an entirely different strand of the so-called multiverse or the many worlds theory, assuming that it's correct. And logically, it seems to me a necessity. It's a necessity based on what we witness in mechanics. And so it could be that, it could be that not only is the past healed and redeemed and thus the future changed, but it could be that the inner meaning of that expression, that statement, used by Neville, used by Gurdjieff, used by Hegel, used by Hugh Everett III, I don't think they were all wrong. They're very different people from very diffuse walks of life and very different concerns coming to the same conclusion. It could be that a different strand of you actually exists, and you could be part of that different strand, or that different strand could have some emotional salving or healing within our current paradigm, but that something happens seems without question,
I'm coming.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the last person who asked the question about the inner child work. Yeah, the actual, I happen to know sort of a therapy modality that streams in the retrocausality. It's called IFS, Internal Family Systems, which goes over different parts of the psyche in terms of family systems, and it's a lot of work, but oftentimes depending on the therapist and their skill, they can work with that inner child and redo things so that you're healing that inner child, and it's almost like you're reparenting them. So what you're saying about retrocausality, actually, I kept thinking as a therapist about how that framework, the IFS framework, really, I guess, uses that, the principles of retrocausality to heal the present so that the person can move on. So I just wanted to kind of speak to the last person that spoke. But what I would like to ask you actually is, based off of what you know about retrocausality, it also made me think of Einstein's spooky action at a distance.
Yeah.
And also, there's this book that I started to read called, I believe it's called Why Woo Woo Works. And he talks about in peak performance training how a lot of times the athletes are told to meditate on them winning a like in the example that you gave, winning the match or winning their tournament or whatever the case is, as part of their conditioning or their preparation or their practice for whatever is coming up. And that seems to really help them with, more so than the actual exercising for whatever the sport is. So I was wondering if you've done any research on how all that connects.
It's so interesting because what you're saying, it points to how little we really know about reality, how reality works. When Einstein used the phrase spooky action at a distance, he was, of course, talking about what we today call quantum entanglement, how a particle or a larger object, sometimes at vast, vast distances, affects the other. A turn in one direction, a reversal of a charge has a mirror effect in another object at a vast distance. And the capacity to measure this is sometimes called Bell's theorem. And a few years ago, a group of physicists won the Nobel Prize in physics for coming up with refinements of Bell's theorem. And it was exactly to measure what Einstein described as spooky action at a distance. Except what's interesting is Einstein, although he was a wonderfully and beautifully open-minded human being, he used that term somewhat derisively. He didn't really like the idea of quantum entanglement because it violates special relativity, which says nothing can move faster than the speed of light. But spooky action at a distance, or quantum entanglement, is simultaneous, so it moves faster than the speed of light. And our whole scientific edifice here in the West is based upon consistency. Systems have to marry, and some pseudo-skeptics will say, well, ESP can't exist because it violates the laws of physics. Well, physics violates the laws of physics. Quantum physics violates the laws of classical physics. Einstein was our greatest classical physicist and a beautiful, beautiful man. And he was very frustrated that quantum entanglement, this so-called spooky action at a distance, violated special relativity, where light speed is the name of the game. Nothing moves faster than light, and weird things happen at light speed. Like, again, time moves backwards or time slows. It's incredible, but this is absolutely true. Astronauts in our own era, although they're traveling nowhere near the velocity of light speed, they do experience minute but measurable reductions in the aging process. It's absolutely incredible. Classical physics itself bends reality, but classical physics and quantum physics do not agree, and we tolerate that, we put up with it, because as Neville Goddard said, if a thing works, who cares what the world thinks? Well, more physicists should be reading Neville and are reading Neville. That's going to take another generation for that influence to be felt, perhaps, but it's so fascinating because this spooky action at a distance is a reality, and it demonstrates that special relativity and quantum physics don't meet up, but we acknowledge them because they both work, and it should foster humility. We just don't know how reality works.
Does anyone else have a question?
Right.
No? Okay, well, I encourage you
Oh,
up,
there's
Jamie, to
Sorry,
Jamie.
I got distracted.
Thank you. This is fascinating. I myself am a philosophy and physics nerd, so this is fascinating. And I love talking about that in the context of magic practice. Thank you so much. I wanted to talk about the idea that, because social justice is very important to me. It's something that is very much a part of my ethical code. And I was wondering about, with the retroactive causality, do you have any thoughts on the ethics of doing things for people in the past from the future, but potentially without their consent or knowledge?
The biggie, consent, yeah. Jacqueline and I, this past summer, were at the Monroe Institute, which is an ESP research facility, but also a therapeutic facility. It's a wonderful place. And we had a chance there to meet and spend some time with America's premier remote viewer, a man named Joe McMoneagle, maybe the greatest, I mean, this is sort of a bold statement to make, but maybe the greatest documented living psychic that we have. And Joe said that he felt that when you're doing some sort of a psychical action for somebody, you must get their consent. Even if it's to heal them, they have to want to be healed. And you have to seek that consent. So there may be, if someone is gone, in the physical sense, there may be big questions, big experimental questions around seeking consent. I would say this, I think in terms of social justice and in terms of just how we all feel walking around day to day, this is a theme that I'm just developing and I'm just working with this, but I really believe this in my heart. I think that the Western world took a really bad exit ramp from understanding when Hegel was remade from a metaphysical philosopher into a materialist philosopher. In 1873, Marx wrote in a preface to one of his volumes of Capital that Hegel had it right, that conflicting forces in this world produce what we call reality. But Hegel was wrong in Marx's view that these conflicting forces were metaphysics, were ideas, were thought forms. And that's exactly what Hegel meant. And he said, Hegel is standing on his head with all this mystical nonsense, and he needs to be turned right side up. Well, in my estimation, we need to leave Hegel standing on his head, just where Marx found him. That doesn't mean that a person doesn't take actions and do positive things in this world. But this idea, we're fond of saying in the West, ideas matter, ideas have consequences, but we very often mean that as ideas having consequences as translating into some activity. Whereas to Hegel, rationalism was metaphysical. Change, he called it a dialectic, was metaphysical. He was a metaphysician. He professed a rationalist mystique, and we, as a Western community, grew convinced. The name of the game is materialism, it's physicalism, it's economics, it's the steam engine, and Hegel was saying, look, you can have all that stuff, but it's actually ideas that make reality, not just as an impulse to action, but as reality itself. And I think if we in the West can find our way back to that, remarkable things could occur.
Any other final questions? Mitch is going to be doing a workshop in Omega coming up. When is that?
That is July of 2026. I have a video up about it on YouTube. I think it's July 12th to 17th, so mark your calendar. I'll be at Omega for 5 days. This is a workshop called Mind Magic, where we'll be talking about this kind of material and doing hands-on experience too.
Yeah, and his socials are all here, so there's a ton of content. I could learn and listen to for days, and it's really fascinating. So by all means, we have books, but there's plenty of content that he's generous to share. And I've seen a theme. It's funny, in the first one that we did, the first Alchemy, was very heavily focused on like shadow work as a ribbon that ties. And in this, all 4 presentations are really reflective of the fact that you don't need all of these elaborate tools. We keep it practical, we keep it basic, we personalize it to ourselves and alchemize. Yeah. But each in their own right, like they were all very, very robust. Thank you. We're only scratching the surface, and thank you all for being here and learning. Dina and I do have ritual that we're going to talk about before we start the dumb supper, silent supper. Yeah, I know. I don't know why it's called a dumb supper. Do you know why it's called a dumb supper?
That's an occult tradition from Hoodoo, where young women would set the supper table backwards, perform the whole supper ceremony backwards, and then, according to some tradition, look in a mirror and see their future husband.
Oh boy.
Maybe a very mixed experience.
Well, this will be a supper in noble silence.
The term dumb was actually used also to, it was assigned to some very specific manifestations of differently abled folks. So it's probably a term that we should try to kind of get that out of our vocabulary, right? So that it could refer to the fact that the supper was in silence. So that's also kind of a historical context.
Thank you.
we like to say noble silence to honor and eat, convene, connect with our ancestors, those who have gone before us. So, Dina?
I was just gonna say we're gonna give a minute, reset, collect ourselves. So you guys want to take like 10 minutes, and then we'll come on back and start ritual. Thank you.